It was a curious friendship that had begun between Narcissus and Goldmund, one that pleased only a few. At times, it seemed to displease even the two friends. At first, it was Narcissus, the thinker, who had the harder time of it. All was mind to him, even love. He was unable to give in to an attraction without thinking about it first. He was the guiding spirit of this friendship. For a long time, he alone consciously recognized its destiny, its depth, its significance. For a long time, he remained lonely, surrounded by love, knowing that his friend would fully belong to him only after he had been able to lean toward recognition. With glowing fervor, playful and irresponsible, Goldman abandoned himself to this new life, while Narcissus, aware and responsible, accepted the demands of fate. For Goldmund, it was a release at first, a convalescence. His youthful need for love had been powerfully aroused, and at the same time hopelessly intimidated by the looks and the kiss of a pretty girl. Deep inside himself, he felt the life he had dreamed of up to now. All his beliefs, all the things for which he felt himself destined, his entire vocation, threatened at the root by the kiss through the window, by the expression of those dark eyes. His father had decided that he was to lead the life of a monk, and with all his will, he had accepted this decision. The fire of his first youthful fervor burned toward a pious, aesthetic hero image. And at the first furtive encounter, at life's first appeal to his senses, at the first beckoning of femininity, he had felt that there was an enemy, a demon, a danger, woman. And now fate was offering him salvation. Now, in his most desperate need, this friendship came toward him and offered his longing a new altar for reverence. Here he was permitted to love, to abandon himself without sinning, to give his heart to an admired older friend, more intelligent than he, to spiritualize the dangerous flames of the senses, to transform them into nobler fires of sacrifice. But during the first spring of this friendship, he ran up against unfamiliar obstacles, unexpected, incomprehensible coolness, frightening demands. It never occurred to him to see himself as the contradiction, the opposite of his friend. He thought that only love, only sincere devotion was needed to fuse two into one, to wipe out differences and bridge contrasts. But how harsh and positive this Narcissus was, how merciless and precise. Innocent abandonment, grateful wandering together in the land of friendship seemed unknown and undesirable to him. He did not seem to understand, to tolerate dreamy strolls on paths that led in no particular direction. When Goldman had seemed ill, he had shown no concern, and loyally he helped and advised him in all matters of school and learning. He explained difficult passages in books, opened new horizons in the realm of grammar, logic, and theology. Yet he never seemed genuinely satisfied with his friend, or to approve of him. Quite often he seemed to be smiling, seemed not to take him seriously. Goldman felt that this was not mere pedantry, not just the not just the condescension of someone older and more intelligent, but that there was something else behind it, something deeper and important. He was unable to recognize this deeper something, and this friendship often made him feel sad and lost. Actually, Narcissus recognized his friend's qualities only too well. He was not blind to the budding beauty, the vital force of nature in him, his flowering opulence. He was no pedant bent on feeding Greek to a fervent young soul, on repaying an innocent love with logic. On the contrary, He loved the blonde adolescent altogether too much, and this was dangerous for him, because loving, to him, was not a natural condition but a miracle. To fall in love was not permitted him. He could not be content with the joyful contemplation of those eyes, with the nearness of this golden light. Not even for a second could he let this love dwell upon the senses, because where Goldmund felt himself destined for monkish asceticism and a lifelong striving for saintliness, Narcissus was truly destined for that life. To him, loving was permitted only in its highest form. Narcissus did not believe in Goldmund's calling to be an ascetic. He knew how to read people more clearly than most, and here love increased his clarity. He recognized Goldmund's nature and understood it deeply, in spite of the contrast, because it was the other, the lost half of his own. He saw that this nature was armored by a hard shell, by fantasies, faults of upbringing, and paternal words. He had long sensed the whole uncomplicated secret of this young life. He was fully aware of what he must do: reveal his secret to its bearer, free him from the shell, give him back to his true nature. It would be hard, and the hardest was that perhaps it would make him lose his friend. With infinite caution, he drew closer to his goal. Months went by before a serious approach became possible between the two, a deep-reaching conversation. In spite of their friendship, they were so far apart. The bowstring was so taut between them. A seeing man and a blind man, they walked side by side. The blind man's unawareness of his own blindness was a consolation only to himself. Narcissus made the first breakthrough when he tried to discover what the experience had been that had driven the boy toward him at a weak moment. It turned out to be less difficult than he had expected. Goldmund had long felt the need to confess the experience of that night. But there was no one, outside the abbot, whom he trusted enough. And the abbot was not his confessor. And when Narcissus reminded his friend, at a moment he judged favorable, of the very beginnings of their bond and gently hinted at the secret, Goldmund immediately said, "If only you were an ordained priest and able to confess to me, I would have liked to free myself of that matter in confession, and I would gladly have done penance for it, but I couldn't tell my confessor." Carefully, shrewdly, Narcissus dug deeper. The vein had been found. "You remember the morning when you seemed to be ill?" he ventured. "You can't have forgotten, since that was when we became friends. I think of it often. Perhaps you didn't notice, but I was rather helpless that morning." "You helpless?" cried his friend, incredulous. "But I was the helpless one. It was I who stood there swallowing, unable to utter a word, who finally began to weep like a child. Ugh, to this day, I feel ashamed of that moment. I thought I could never face you again. You had seen me so disgracefully weak." Narcissus groped ahead. "I understand," he said. It must have been unpleasant for you. Such a firm, courageous boy breaking into tears in front of a stranger. And a teacher at that. It was quite out of character. Well, that morning I merely thought you were ill, in the throes of a fever. Even a man like Aristotle may behave strangely, but you were not ill. You had no fever, and that is why you feel ashamed. No one feels ashamed of succumbing to a fever, does he? You felt ashamed because you had succumbed to something else, to something that overpowered you. Did something special happen?" Goldmund hesitated a second. Then he said slowly, "Yes, something special did happen. Let's pretend you're my confessor. Sooner or later, this thing must be told." With bowed head, he told his friend the story of that night. Smilingly, Narcissus replied, "Well, yes, going to the village is of course forbidden, but one can do all kinds of forbidden things and laugh them away. Or one can confess them, and that is that. They need no longer concern one. Why shouldn't you commit these little foolishnesses like other students? What's so terrible about that?" Angrily, without holding back, Goldmund burst out, You do talk like a schoolmaster. You know very well what it's all about. Of course I don't see a great sin in breaking the house rules for once, to play a student prank, although it's not exactly part of the preparatory training for cloister life. Just a moment, my friend, Narcissus called sharply. Don't you know that many pious fathers went through precisely that kind of preparatory training? Don't you know that a wastrel's life may be one of the shortest roads to sainthoods? Oh, don't lecture, protested Goldmund. It wasn't a trifling disobedience that weighed on my conscience. It was something else. It was that girl. I can't describe the sensation to you. It was a feeling that if I gave in to the enticement, if I merely reached out to touch the girl, I'd never be able to turn back. That sin would swallow me like the maw of hell and not give me up ever. That it would be the end of every beautiful dream, of all virtue, of all love of God and good. Narcissus nodded in deep thought. Love of God, he said slowly, searching for words. It's not always the same as love of good. I wish it were that simple. We know what is good. It is written in the commandments. But God is not contained only in the commandments, you know. They are only an infinitesimal part of him. A man may abide by the commandments and be far from God. But you don't understand, Goldmund complained. Certainly I understand. You feel that woman, sex, is the essence of everything you call world or sin. You think yourself incapable of all other sins, or, if you did commit them, you think they would not crush you, that you can confess them and be whole again. Yes, that is exactly how I feel. You see, I do understand. You're not so terribly wrong after all. The story of Eve and the serpent is certainly no idle tale, and yet you are not right about this, my dear friend. You would be right if you were the abbot Daniel, or your baptismal saint, the holy Christopuston, or a bishop, or a priest, even a simple monk. But you aren't. You are a student, and although you wish to remain in the cloister for life, or your father wishes it for you, still you have not taken any vows. You have not been consecrated. If some pretty girl were to tempt you one of these days, and you were to give into the temptation, you would not have broken any vows. No written vows, Goldmund cried heatedly, but an unwritten one, the most sacred, something I carry inside me. Can't you see that this may apply to many others, but not to me? Have you not been consecrated either? Wait, you have not been consecrated either, nor have you taken any vows yet. But you would never permit yourself to touch a woman. Or am I mistaken? Isn't that how you are? Or aren't you the man I thought you were? Were. Didn't you long ago, in your heart, make the vow that has not been made with words before superiors? And don't you feel bound by it forever? Aren't you exactly like me? No, Goldmund, I am not like you, not in the way you think, although I, too, am keeping an unspoken vow. In that respect, you are right, but I am in no way like you. Someday you will think of what I'm going to say to you now. Our friendship has no other purpose, no other reason than to show you how utterly unlike me you are. Goldmund was stunned. Narcissus's expression and tone permitted no contradiction. He was silent. Why had Narcissus said these words? Why should Narcissus's unspoken vow be more sacred than his own? Didn't he take him at all seriously? Didn't he see nothing but a child in him? Well, did he see nothing but a child in him? The confusions and griefs of this strange friendship were beginning all over again. Narcissus no longer had any doubt about the nature of Goldmund's secret. It was Eve who stood behind it, the original mother. But how was it possible that the awakening of sex met with such bitter antagonism in such a beautiful, healthy, flowing adolescent? I read that wrong. Let me read that again. Narcissus no longer had any doubt about the nature of Goldmund's secret. It was Eve who stood behind it, the original mother. But how was it possible that the awakening of sex met with such bitter antagonism in such a beautiful, healthy, flowing adolescent? There must be a secret enemy who managed to split this magnificent human being within himself and turn him against his natural urges. This demon had to be discovered, had to be conjured up and made visible. Only then could it be defeated. Meanwhile, Goldmund had been more and more neglected by his classmates, or rather, they felt neglected by him, betrayed. His friendship with Narcissus pleased no one. The slanderers, those who had themselves been in love with one or the other, and the whole thing was against nature. Even those who were certain that no vice could be suspected here shook their heads. No one wanted to see these two friends together. It seemed that they were setting themselves apart from the others by this friendship, arrogantly, as though they were aristocrats for whom the others were not good enough. That was unbrotherly, not in keeping with the cloister spirit, not Christian. Many things about the two rumors, accusations, Many things about the two rumors, accusations, slander reached Abbot Daniel. He had seen many friendships between young men in over 40 years of cloister life. They belonged to cloister life and were a pleasant tradition, sometimes amusing, sometimes a danger. He waited, watched, did not intervene. Such a violent, exclusive friendship was rare. Probably not undangerous, but since he did not for an instant doubt its purity, he decided to let it take its course. If it had not been for Narcissus's exceptional position among students and teachers, the abbot would not have hesitated to place a few separating rules between the two. It was not good for Goldmund to have withdrawn from his classmates and to be in close association with someone older, with a teacher. But it was permissible to disturb the extraordinary, highly gifted Narcissus, whom all teachers considered their equal, if not their superior, in his privileged career, and relieve him of his teaching position? Had Narcissus not proved himself as a teacher? Had this friendship led to partiality and neglectfulness? The abbot would have demoted him immediately. Okay. But there was nothing to be held against him, only rumors and others' jealous suspicions. Moreover, the abbot knew of Narcissus' special gifts, of his curious, penetrating, perhaps slightly presumptuous insight into people. He did not overestimate these gifts. He would have preferred Narcissus to have other gifts, but he did not doubt that Narcissus had noticed something unusual in the student Goldmund, that he knew him far better than he or anyone else in the cloister. He himself, the abbot, had not noticed anything unusual about Goldmund, apart from his winning nature and perhaps a certain eagerness, a somewhat precocious zeal that made him conduct himself, still a student and a boarder, as though he belonged to the cloister and was one of the brothers. He saw no reason to fear that Narcissus would encourage this immature, though touching zeal, or that he would spur it on. He feared, rather, for Goldmund, that his friend might infect him with a certain spiritual pride and erudite arrogance. But this danger seemed unlikely for this particular pupil. It was all right to wait and see. When he thought how much simpler it was for a superior, how much more peaceful and comfortable to rule over average rather than strong or exceptional characters, he had to sigh and smile. No, he was not going to let himself be infected by suspicions. He did not wish to be ungrateful for the two exceptional human beings entrusted to his care. Narcissus pondered a great deal about his friend. His special gift of spotting and emotionally recognizing the nature and destiny of others had long since told him about Goldmund. All that was alive and radiant in this young man spoke only too clearly. He bore all the marks of a strong human being, richly endowed, sensually and spiritually, perhaps an artist, but at any rate a person with a great potential for love, whose fulfillment and happiness consisted of being easily inflamed and able to give himself. Then why was this being, with such rich and perceptive senses, so set on leading the ascetic life of the mind? Narcissus thought at great length about it. He knew that Goldmund's father favored his son's determination. Could the father have inspired it? What spell had he cast over his son to make him believe that this was his destiny, his duty? What sort of person was this father? Narcissus had often intentionally touched on the subject of his father, and Goldmund had frequently spoken of him. And yet he could not imagine him, could not see him. Was it not strange and suspicious? Whenever Goldmund told a story about a trout he had caught as a boy, when he described the butterfly, imitated the call of a bird, spoke of a friend, a dog, a beggar, he created a vivid picture. Whenever he spoke of his father, one saw nothing. No, if his father had really been such an important, powerful, dominant figure in Goldmund's life, he would have been able to describe him differently, to conjure up vivid images of him. Narcissus did not think highly of his father. He did not like him. Sometimes he wondered if he were really Goldmund's father. But what gave him such power? How had he succeeded in filling Goldmund's soul with dreams so alien to his soul? Goldmund also brooded a great deal. He did not feel warmly loved by his friend, and yet he often had the unpleasant sensation of not being taken seriously or being treated like a child. And what did it mean when his friend insinuated again and again that he was not like him? Yet thinking did not fill all of Goldmund's days. He was not able to think for too long at a time. There were other things to be done in the course of a day. He often went to see the friar porter, with whom he was on excellent terms. He'd beg and coax for an opportunity to ride the horse bless for an hour or two. And he was very popular with the few nearby cloister tenants, especially with the miller. He'd often stalk otters with the miller's man, or they'd bake pancakes with the finely ground prelate's flour, which Goldmund could tell from all other kinds of flour, eyes closed, just by the smell of it. Although he spent time with Narcissus, there still remained a number of hours in which he pursued his old habits and pleasures, and usually the service was also a joy to him. He loved to sing in the student choir. He loved to say rosary in front of a favorite altar, to listen to the solemnly beautiful Latin of the Mass, to see the gold of the receptacles and ornaments glitter through clouds of incense, and the quiet, venerable saints' figures standing on columns, the evangelists with the beasts, Saint Jacob with his hat and pilgrim satchel. He felt drawn toward these wood and stone figures. He liked to think that they stood in secret relationship to him, perhaps like immortal, omniscient godfathers who protected and guided his life. He felt the same secret bond and love for the columns and capitals of the windows and doors, for the altar ornaments, for the beautifully profiled staves and wreaths, for the flowers and thickets of sprouting leaves that burst from the stone of the columns and unfolded so eloquently and intensely. It seemed a valuable, intimate secret to him that outside of nature, with its plants and creatures, there existed a second, silent, man-made nature. These men, beasts, and plants of stone and wood. He spent many of his free hours copying these figures, animal heads and leaf clusters. Sometimes he also tried to draw real flowers, horses, human faces. And he was very fond of the hymns, especially of those in honor of Mary. He loved the firm, severe pace of these songs, their constantly recurring rhythms and praises. He could follow their reverent meaning adoringly, or he could forget their meaning and become engrossed in the solemn cadence of the verses and let himself be filled by them, by the deep drawn-out notes, the full sound of the vowels, the pious refrains. Deep down in his heart, he had no love for learning, grammar, and logic, although they, too, had their beauty. His real love was for the image and sound world. His real love was for the image and sound world of liturgy. And every so often, for brief moments, he'd break the estrangement that he had set in between him and his classmates. It annoyed and bored him in the long run to find himself surrounded by rejection and coolness. Every so often, he'd make a grumpy bench companion laugh or start a taciturn bed neighbor chatting. He'd work at it for an hour, ingratiating himself and winning back a couple of friends for a while. Twice these approaches brought him, much against his intention, an invitation to go to the village. Then he'd become frightened and quickly draw back. No, he was not going to the village again, and he managed to forget the girl with the braids. Never, or almost never, to think of her anymore.